The warehouse shelves were empty, not just sparse but stripped. Every single one of the 60-meter steel racks in our Parramatta warehouse stood bare, gleaming under the industrial fluorescent lights like a skeleton. I stood at the heavy roller door, still wearing the floral summer dress I'd landed in only 3 hours ago. My skin still felt the warmth of the Bali sun, but my blood was turning to ice. 6 years of inventory, kitchen goods, hospitality supplies, the very heartbeat of my life gone. There was no sign of a break-in, no shattered glass, no forced locks, just the faint, lingering smell of a space that had been professionally cleared and recently mopped. I reached into my bag for my phone, my hand trembling so hard I nearly dropped it. I had been gone for exactly 7 days. In that 1 week, someone hadn't just robbed me, they had erased me. But that wasn't the part that kept me awake. My name is Sandra Hale. I'm 41 years old, and until that Tuesday morning in Western Sydney, I considered myself a success story. I spent my 20s climbing the ladder in freight logistics, but I always knew I wanted something that belonged to me. In 2013, I finally took the leap. I remember the day we signed the lease on that warehouse in Parramatta like it was yesterday. It was a dusty, cavernous space, but to me, it was a palace. I lived on black coffee and 3 hours of sleep, negotiating with suppliers in Guangzhou at 4 a.m., and delivering pallets myself in a rented van by noon. I built this business SK by SK, contract by contract. I knew every client's name and every supplier's preferred payment terms. By year 6, we were turning over millions, and the warehouse was a thriving, humming hub of activity. I was the operations manager, the meticulous engine behind everything. Marcus Webb was my partner in every sense of the word. We met at our old logistics firm, two restless souls who thought we could do it better. He was the charming one, the man who could talk a freight forwarder into a discount with a smile at a joke. He was 44, a logistics director who handled the warehouse floor while I handled the clients. We were a perfect 50-50 split. We started with $35,000 each and a handshake that felt sturdier than any legal document. Over 6 years, we became family. We had lunch every Friday at the same cafe near the industrial estate, celebrating the big wins and commiserating over the shipping delays. I trusted him with my bank codes, my digital signatures, and my future. When I met Daniel and told Marcus I was finally getting married, he gave me a hug that felt genuine. He told me I deserved this break. The wedding was a blur of white lace and nervous laughter. Daniel, a steady builder from Penrith, was the calm I needed after years of high-pressure business. Marcus stood there in the front row, cheering the loudest. He even checked in on the morning of the ceremony to make sure the warehouse staffing was handled, so I wouldn't have a single thing to worry about. "Go to Bali, Sand," he had said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Forget about the inventory. Forget about the freight. I've got the floor. You just be a bride for once." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe that after 6 years of relentless work, the foundation I had built was strong enough to stand for 7 days without me. I boarded that flight with a clear head and a heavy wedding ring, ready to finally exhale. Bali was a dream: sunsets over the Indian Ocean, long breakfasts by the pool, and 7 days of absolute silence from the office. I checked my email exactly twice. On day 4, I saw a routine notification about a supplier payment. Marcus had handled it. Everything looked normal, but on the final evening, as Daniel and I sat in our favorite rattan chairs watching the sky turn a bruised purple, a small, cold needle of unease pricked at my chest. Marcus hadn't answered my text wishing him a good weekend. It was a tiny thing, easily dismissed as him being busy or respecting my space, but Marcus was a man of habit, and his silence felt deliberate. I put my phone face down on the table and tried to focus on my husband's voice, but the peace was gone. The shadow had already started to move toward me. I wish I had stopped there. Walking into that empty warehouse felt like a physical assault. My heels clicked on the concrete, the sound echoing in the hollow space. I called Marcus. 1 ring, then straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I walked to the small office at the back, my heart hammering against my ribs. The door was locked. I used my key, my fingers fumbling. Inside, Marcus's desk was eerily clean. No coffee mug, no stray papers, no post-it notes. It looked like he had never been there at all. I sat in my chair and pulled up our business bank account on my laptop. The screen loaded slowly. The spinning wheel felt like a countdown. When the balance finally appeared, I stopped breathing. $190,000 had been transferred out in 3 separate chunks over the last 72 hours. The recipient was an account I didn't recognize. My vision blurred. This wasn't a mistake. I finally got through to Kelly Ashton, our bookkeeper. She sounded like she had been crying for days. "Sandra, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Marcus told me you'd authorized everything. He said you were liquidating the stock to clear debts before the merger." My head spun. There was no merger. There were no debts. At least, not business ones. Kelly told me a fleet of unmarked trucks had arrived at 7 a.m. the day after I left. Marcus had been there personally, directing the loaders, checking off the inventory lists, and signing the removal paperwork. He told the staff the business was changing direction and that their contracts were being moved to a new entity. He had gaslit our entire team while I was singing my vows. He'd used my absence as his primary weapon, ensuring no one would think to call me and ruin my honeymoon. "But the signature, Kelly," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. "I didn't sign anything." There was a long, heavy silence on the line. He showed me the digital authorization, "Sandra. It was your signature. Your exact handwriting. I saw it on the screen myself." I looked at my own hands, the same hands that had signed 6 years of honest contracts, and I felt a wave of nausea. He hadn't just stolen the money. He had stolen my identity. He had forged my consent to destroy our life's work. I sat in that silent office in Parramatta, surrounded by the ghosts of a business that had existed only a week ago, and I realized the man I had trusted for 6 years was a stranger. He had been planning this for months, perhaps years. That should have been enough to break me. It wasn't. I spent the next 48 hours combing through our files, trying to find where the decay had started. It wasn't just a large theft. It was a trail of small, jagged inconsistencies that I had previously mistaken for minor errors. In November, Marcus had started coming in 40 minutes late, his eyes bloodshot and his temper short. When I asked him if anything was wrong, he snapped that he was just tired of carrying the physical load of the warehouse while I played with spreadsheets. It was a bizarre, uncharacteristic jab. Later that month, he asked me about the current liquidation value of our hospitality stock, just for insurance purposes, San. He'd said, leaning against my office door with a casualness that now felt like a performance. I had answered him without a second thought, even showing him the valuation reports he hadn't asked to see. He'd been taking notes on my desk while I chatted about our growth. In December, I'd noticed a series of unusual freight charges. They were small enough to fly under the radar, $600 here, $800 there. But they didn't match our shipping manifests. When I brought them to Marcus, he didn't even look up from his phone. "It's back-end surcharges from the Jakarta port, Sandra. Don't worry about it. I'll handle the reconciliation with the broker." He said it with such weary authority that I felt guilty for even questioning his domain. I doubted my own memory of the contract terms. He'd made me feel like I was being pedantic, a micromanager who didn't trust her own partner. Looking back, that was the moment he shifted the power dynamic. He wasn't just hiding money. He was training me to look away from the very things I was supposed to monitor. The air in our partnership was changing. By January, the gaslighting had reached a fever pitch. 3 weeks before the wedding, Marcus sat me down and asked a question that felt like a joke. If we ever had to liquidate suddenly, like in a fire sale, which buyer would you trust most? I laughed and told him we weren't in that position. He didn't laugh back. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. "It's just business planning, Sandra. You're going away for a week. I need to know the contingency plan for every scenario." I felt a sudden, sharp pang of anxiety, but I filed it away under pre-wedding stress. I was so consumed by seating charts and flower arrangements that I didn't see him gathering the matches. He was already in contact with a bulk liquidation buyer in Shipping Norton, a man known for paying cash and asking no questions about title or ownership. On Monday morning, I met with the local police at Parramatta Station. Detective Miller, a woman with tired eyes and a firm handshake, took my statement. When I showed her the bank transfers, she didn't look surprised. "This is classic," she said, tapping the screen. He stayed just under the $10,000 reporting threshold for the smaller withdrawals over the last year. But these big ones? He knew he was done. He wasn't hiding anymore, he was escaping. She told me that while the theft was clear, the forgery of my digital signature would be harder to prove without a forensic audit. My heart sank. Marcus had used a copy of my signature from a supplier onboarding form I'd signed 18 months ago. He digitally extracted it and layered it onto the sale authorization. It looked perfect. I realized then that I wasn't fighting a thief. I was fighting an architect. The third-party complication arrived on Wednesday in the form of a legal letter from Marcus's own solicitor. I couldn't believe it. He was striking first. The letter claimed that I had verbally authorized liquidation of the inventory during a phone call on the 15th of January. It stated that I had wanted to exit the day-to-day operations to focus on my marriage, and that Marcus was simply executing our agreed-upon strategy. My hands shook as I read the words. It was a complete fabrication, delivered with the cold precision of a legal mandate. He was trying to rewrite history before I could even document it. I screamed in my car in the driveway of our new home, the sound muffled by the leather seats. He wasn't just taking the money. He was trying to make me the villain of my own destruction. I hired a solicitor of my own, a woman named Elena who specialized in commercial fraud. We sat in her glass-walled office overlooking George Street, surrounded by the evidence of my ruined life. Elena was methodical. She pulled my phone records from the 15th of January. There was no call from Marcus. Not at 9 a.m., not at noon, not at midnight. There was no record of any conversation that could even be misinterpreted as an authorization to sell. "He's hoping you don't have the records, Sandra," Elena said, her voice calm and steady. "He's banking on your confusion and your grief." We also found something else. A series of small payments to a private account over the last 14 months, totaling nearly $90,000. It was a secondary layer of betrayal I hadn't even suspected. I sat there paralyzed. I already knew. The midpoint reveal was heavier than I ever could have imagined. Elena tracked down one of the suppliers Marcus had supposedly reconciled with. The supplier, a man I'd known for years, was confused. "Sandra, Marcus told me you were closing the warehouse because of a terminal illness. He said you didn't want anyone to know, especially not the clients." I felt like the floor had vanished beneath me. He hadn't just stolen the stock. He had used my health, my very life, as a shield for his theft. He'd weaponized the sympathy of my colleagues to ensure they wouldn't ask questions while they watched him strip the shelves. The depth of the malice was breathtaking. This wasn't about gambling debts anymore. This was about a total, calculated annihilation of my reputation. I walked out of that office and into the humid Sydney afternoon, the city suddenly feeling like a cage. That night, I told Daniel everything. We sat on the floor of our half-unpacked living room, the wedding gifts still in their boxes, and I laid out the spreadsheets and the legal letters. I expected him to be angry, to want to hunt Marcus down, but Daniel just held me, his chin resting on the top of my head. "He's a ghost now, Sandra," he whispered. "We don't chase ghosts. We build walls." But the walls I needed were made of evidence and law, not bricks. I realized that the investigation was no longer about getting the money back. It was about proving that I still existed, that my word still meant something. The direction of my life had shifted from growth to survival. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my body vibrating with a restless, jagged energy. The truth was finally out, but it was far more lethal than I feared. The full reveal happened on a Tuesday, exactly 1 month after I returned from Bali. Elena had secured a court order to freeze Marcus's personal accounts, and what we found inside them was a map of a decade-long decay. The gambling debt wasn't just $200,000. It was nearly $500,000. He had been borrowing from high-interest private lenders to pay off gaming agencies, creating a suffocating spiral of debt that he'd been hiding behind Friday lunches and office jokes. But the layered betrayal, the part that made the room stop spinning and go stone cold, was the discovery of a second set of books. He hadn't just stolen the inventory. He had been skimming 5% off every major shipment for 3 years. He'd created a dummy freight brokerage company and billed us for logistics consulting that never happened. I'd been paying him to rob me for over 1,000 days. The violation felt most visceral when I returned to my own home, a place he had visited dozens of times. While I was in the hospital 3 years ago for a minor surgery, Marcus had been the one to bring Daniel the house keys. We found out later through his own phone records that he'd used that week to let himself into my home office. He hadn't stolen jewelry or electronics. He'd photographed my bank statements, my passport, and my tax records. He'd used the sacred space of my recovery to gather the tools for my eventual execution. My stomach cramped, a sharp, twisting pain that left me doubled over the kitchen sink. I felt like I was being watched by a ghost in my own hallway. Every memory of his kindness was now a jagged glass shard. I stood there shriveling in my own skin, unable to draw a full breath. The self-questioning was a silent, relentless predator. I spent hours staring at old photographs of us at trade shows, looking for the telltale sign I must have missed. Was his smile too tight? Were his eyes too restless? I questioned every decision I'd made in the last 6 years. If I hadn't gone on the honeymoon, would I have caught him? If I hadn't trusted him with the digital keys, would we still have a business? The guilt was irrational but absolute. I'd built a life on a foundation of air, and I felt like a fool for not noticing the breeze. I was a professional, a meticulous manager, Yet I'd been outmaneuvered by a man who spent his nights in the dark corners of betting apps. The humiliation was a physical weight, a leaden pressure in my chest that made it hard to even look Daniel in the eye. The irreversible clarity arrived with a single text message from an unknown number. It was a photo of Marcus, taken at a bar in regional New South Wales, holding a drink and laughing with a group of men I didn't recognize. The timestamp was 48 hours after he'd cleared the warehouse. He didn't look like a man in crisis. He didn't look like a man crisis, patat, or regret. He looked triumphant. He looked triumphant. He looked free. In that moment, the why didn't matter anymore. The gambling, the debts, the resentment, they were justifications for a fundamental lack of soul. He was a man who could look at a person he called family and see only a liquidation value. I deleted the message, blocked the number, and felt a strange, cold peace descend. The monster was real and he was gone. It was time to stop wondering and start acting. The fallout leaked into my social life like poison in a well. I attended a birthday party for a mutual friend, hoping for a moment of normalcy. Instead, I found myself in a room that went suddenly quiet when I walked in. People I had known for a decade looked at their shoes or suddenly needed more ice for their drinks. One woman, a longtime client, approached me and whispered, "Sandra, it's just such a shame about the mismanagement. Marcus said you just lost the fire for it." I stood there, my drink trembling in my hand, realized that he'd spent months poisoning the social soil I stood on. The public humiliation was a slow-motion car crash. I wasn't just broke, I was an outcast in the very community I had helped build. I left that party without saying goodbye to anyone. The uncomfortable family moments were even harder. My sister, who had always been slightly jealous of the business, couldn't help herself. "Maybe it's a blessing, Sandra. Now you can focus on being a wife instead of a boss." She meant it as comfort, but it felt like a slap. My parents were horrified, but their concern was steeped in pity that made me feel small. They kept offering to help out with groceries as if I were a child who had lost her pocket money. Every interaction was a reminder of what I had lost: my autonomy, my status, and my sense of self-worth. I felt like I was being defined by a crime I hadn't committed. The financial damage was measurable in dollars, but the relational damage was an unfillable crater. I stopped answering the phone. I wasn't ready to be a pity project. The unexpected development came from an unlikely source. A junior warehouse assistant from our old rival company reached out. He'd heard what happened and told me that Marcus had tried to sell him our client list a week before the wedding. He said you were moving to Bali and wanted the clients taken care of. The kid told me over a coffee in Parramatta, but the numbers didn't add up, so I passed. I sat there, stunned. Marcus had tried to sell my reputation separately from the stock. He'd been trying to liquidate my entire existence, bit by bit. The audacity was almost impressive. It gave me a new perspective on the litigation. I wasn't just fighting for restitution. I was fighting to take my name back from the market he'd tried to sell it in. I realized I'd been too polite. The fallout wasn't a quick resolution. It was a long, grinding winter of legal depositions and bank meetings. The tone of my life was heavy and restrained. Every morning, I woke up and looked at the empty space where my career used to be. The legal fees were mounting, eating into the small savings Daniel and I had for our future home. The stress was a constant, low-level hum in our new marriage, a ghost at the dinner table that we both tried to ignore. We didn't talk about the honeymoon anymore. It felt like a memory from a different life, a beautiful dream that had been used to lure me into a trap. I felt like I was walking through a thick fog, unable to see the shore, but knowing I had to keep swimming. That was the part that nearly broke us. The quiet resolve didn't arrive with a thunderclap. It arrived on a raining Tuesday in July, while I was organizing a kitchen drawer. I found a spare warehouse key, the old one, for the Parramatta site buried under some takeout menus. I held the cold metal in my palm and realized I hadn't thought about Marcus for 3 whole hours. The obsession with his why had finally burned out, leaving only a clean, hard space for my what next. I walked to the trash can and dropped the key in. It made a small, final sound. I wasn't waiting for a court to give me my life back anymore. I was going to take it. I opened my laptop and registered a new ABN. The name was Hale Logistics. No partners, no shared authority, just me. It felt like the first deep breath I'd taken in 14 months. Practical action is the best antidote to despair. I spent the next month working from my dining room table, reaching out to the suppliers who hadn't abandoned me. I was honest with them. I'm starting over, smaller this time. I need credit terms and I need patience. To my surprise, most of them agreed. They didn't care about the drama or the litigation. They cared about the fact that I'd always paid them on time for 6 years. I rented a small storage unit in Blacktown, just a fraction of the size of the old warehouse, but it was mine. I didn't have a forklift yet, so I used a manual pallet jack. Every box I moved myself was a victory. My muscles ached, but the mental fog was finally lifting. I was no longer a victim of a crime. I was a founder of a business. The internal shift was subtle but permanent. I stopped looking for betrayal in every handshake. I realized that my mistake wasn't trusting Marcus. It was trusting without structure. I began building systems that were partner-proof, independent audits, dual signature requirements for anything over $5,000, and a bookkeeper who reported directly to me and an external accountant simultaneously. These weren't signs of cynicism. They were signs of maturity. I was protecting the business from the worst version of humanity, which allowed me to be the best version of myself in my deals. I found a sense of peace in the accountability. Every night I reviewed the books, not out of fear, but out of a deep, satisfying pride in the clarity. I knew where every cent was. I knew exactly who I was. I saw that symbolic object again, the Bali bracelet. The morning I signed my first major contract for Hale Logistics, it had been sitting in my jewelry box, a reminder of the happiest week and the worst week of my life. I put it on. It felt different now. It was no longer a symbol of the trap Marcus had set. It was a symbol of the survival I had earned. The contract was small, just a local hospitality group in Western Sydney, but it was the start of the climb. I looked at my signature on the page, my real signature, and I felt a surge of quiet power. I had built it once, and I was building it again, bone by bone and brick by brick. Marcus had cleared the shelves, but he hadn't cleared the knowledge. I was the inventory now. Justice is a slow, imperfect machine, and I eventually had to accept that. Marcus was ordered to pay restitution, but he had no assets left to seize. He was a ghost in the system, living on the fringes of the industry he tried to dominate. I didn't get justice in the way you see it on television. There was no dramatic courtroom confession, no big check, but I got peace. And in the end, that proved to be more valuable. I stopped checking his social media. I stopped asking mutual friends how he was doing. He became a footnote in a much longer, better story. The business in Blacktown began to grow, slowly but steadily. I hired my first employee, a young woman who reminded me of myself at 25. I taught her about logistics, and I taught her about systems. There was one final moment of uncomfortable exposure. I ran into Marcus at a freight terminal in Botany. He looked older, tired, his suit a little too loose. He saw me and froze. For a second I thought he might apologize, or try to justify himself again, but he just looked away and walked quickly toward the exit. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the need to shout. I just felt nothing. He was just a man who had made a series of terrible choices and was now living with the quiet, gray consequences. I realized then that my recovery was complete. His presence no longer had the power to change the temperature of my day. I walked to my car, finished my paperwork, and drove home to Daniel. The ghost was finally laid to rest. Daniel and I returned to Bali for our 3rd anniversary. We sat in the same rattan chairs, watching the same bruised purple sky over the Indian Ocean. But this time, my phone was in the hotel safe. I didn't need to check my email. I didn't need to worry about the warehouse. The foundation I'd built this time was real, made of structure and truth instead of just blind faith. We didn't talk about the betrayal. We talked about the future, about the house we were finally going to buy in Penrith and the family we were ready to start. The honeymoon wasn't a memory of a trap anymore. It was the start of a marriage that had already survived its darkest hour. I reached out and took Daniel's hand, feeling the steadiness I had missed for so long. If you are standing in an empty warehouse right now, if someone you trusted has just walked away with your life's work, I want you to listen to me. The emptiness is not the ending. It is a clean slate. It hurts, and it will hurt for a long time, but it is not terminal. You still have the knowledge. You still have the power to decide what happens on the page after this one. Build your walls, build your systems, and build your life on the one thing that can't be liquidated: yourself. My name is Sandra Hale, and I am still here. We took the shelves, but I kept the foundation. And a foundation once built can never truly be cleared.